Questions for reflection. In our first reading, the sage who writes this beautiful reflective book, the book of Sirach, remembers his youth. He asked the Lord for wisdom. In the Hebrew Scriptures, what Christians call the Old Testament, wisdom is often spoken of in this manner. It is personalized. Here, the author of Sirach calls wisdom her. Do we ask the Lord for wisdom? We should. But the wisdom we need is heavenly wisdom. In the letter of St. James in the New Testament, we read these words, and I quote, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives to all men generously and without reproaching, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways, will receive anything from the Lord." And that's James chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. Our response from Psalm 19 further develops this admonition to always turn to God. David sings, and I quote, "The precepts of Yahweh are honest, joy for the heart. The commandment of Yahweh is pure, light for the eyes. The fear of Yahweh is pure, lasting forever. The judgments of Yahweh are true, upright. Every one more desirable than gold, even than the finest gold. His words are sweeter than honey that drips from the comb. Thus your servant is formed by them. Observing them brings great reward." The gospel text for today's Holy Mass speaks of true authority, the authority of God. All true authority comes from God. These verses are taken from the last section of the 11th chapter of that gospel. The authority of Jesus is questioned by the religious leaders of his day. Think of this. These men were supposed to be the ones who spoke on behalf of God. Yet they had become so blinded by their own self-love and power, they failed to see the incarnate Word of God, the second person of the Blessed Trinity, standing in front of them. This kind of spiritual blindness doesn't happen overnight. Sadly, it creeps in slowly and can happen to every one of us. This is a particularly dangerous temptation for those who consider themselves to be devout. It's an easy trap to fall into, and fall is the operative word. The problem is we may not know it is even happening to us before we find ourselves awakened to its corrosive effects through the bad fruit it bears within and around us. We are often called to deal with our own inner Pharisee, and when we do, the world begins to look different. We see Jesus with the eyes of living faith, and we are changed by the encounter. We are called by him to be emptied out of ourselves so that we can be filled with his divine life and be used by him for others.